The stars burned cold and silent in the endless darkness of space. Commander Daniel Hayes stood alone on the observation deck of the Uns Valiant. His hands clasped behind his back as he watched the distant galaxies spin slowly in their eternal dance. He was a tall man, with gray hair at his temples and deep lines round his eyes that spoke of years spent fighting wars among the stars. At 43 years old, he had seen more combat than most soldiers twice his age. But something about this night felt different. Something felt wrong. The door behind him slid open with a soft hiss, and Lieutenant Catherine Moore stepped onto the deck. She was young, barely 26, with sharp brown eyes and dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun. Despite her youth, she had earned her place aboard the flagship through skill and courage that impressed even the most veteran officers. "Commander, we have an urgent transmission coming in from Outpost Kappa 7, she said. Her voice steady but tight with concern. Daniel turned from the viewport and nodded. "Put it through to the main screen." The holographic display flickered to life, and the face that appeared made Daniel's blood run cold. Captain Gregory Ellis looked like a man who had seen hell itself. His uniform was torn and stained with blood and soot. Behind him, flames roared and sparks flew from damaged consoles. The sounds of explosions echoed through the transmission. "Commander Hayes, thank God I reached you," Gregory said, his voice hoarse from smoke and exhaustion. "The Vexari have launched a full invasion. We counted over 300 capital ships before our sensors went down. They punched through our defense grid like it was made of paper. We're not going to last much longer out here." Daniel felt his stomach drop, but he kept his face calm. 300 ships was more than the entire human fleet combined. The Vexari had never shown such force before. "What's their heading, Captain?" "Earth, sir. They're heading straight for Earth. We tried to slow them down, but they just keep coming. We need Squadron 42. It's the only force that can stop them now." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Squadron 42 was humanity's final defense. It's an elite group of the best pilots and the most advanced warships ever built. They had trained for years for a moment like this, but they had never been deployed in full force. The fact that they were being called upon meant that all other options had failed. "Hold your position as long as you can, Captain," Daniel said. "We're coming." The transmission cut out, replaced by static and then silence. Daniel stood still for a moment, processing what he had just heard. Then he turned to Catherine with a look of iron determination. "Sound general quarters? All hands to battle stations. I want every pilot in their cockpit and every weapon system online within the hour. Get me Admiral Patricia Grant on a secure channel." Catherine nodded and rushed to carry out his orders. Within minutes, the Uns Valiant transformed from a quiet ship drifting through space into a hive of controlled chaos. Alarm bells rang through every corridor. Crew members ran to their posts, pulling on equipment and checking weapons. In the fighter bays, mechanics performed final inspections on the sleek Hornet-class interceptors while pilots climbed into their cockpits. Lieutenant Commander Samuel Drake was one of those pilots. He was 34 years old, with broad shoulders and a confident smile that had charmed more than a few people during shore leave, but right now there was no smile on his face. He knew what a full deployment of Squadron 42 meant, and he knew that many of the pilots around him would not survive what was coming. He pulled on his flight helmet and looked at the young woman strapping into the cockpit next to his. Ensign Laura Bennett was 24, with red hair cut short and freckles scattered across her nose. She had only been with the squadron for 8 months, but she flew like she had been born in a cockpit. "You ready for this, Bennett?" Samuel asked. Laura looked at him, and he could see the fear in her eyes. But there was something else there too: courage, determination, the same fire that burned in every pilot who had chosen to defend humanity against the darkness of space. "Ready as I'll ever be." "Sir," she said, "let's show these aliens why they picked the wrong planet to mess with." Samuel nodded and gave her a thumbs up before closing his canopy. Around him, dozens of other pilots did the same, their engines humming with barely contained power as they waited for the order to launch. Back on the bridge, Commander Hayes stood at the center of a storm of activity. Tactical displays showed the positions of every ship in the fleet, while communications officers coordinated with vessels across the sector. Chief Engineer Marcus Cole, a burly man with grease-stained hands and a permanent scowl, reported that all systems were operating at full capacity. "I have Admiral Grant on the line," Catherine announced. The hologram of Patricia Grant materialized before Daniel. She was in her 60s, with silver hair and a face that had been carved by decades of command. She had led humanity through 3 major conflicts and countless smaller ones, and she had never once shown doubt or fear in front of her troops. "I'm authorizing full deployment of Squadron 42, she said without preamble. "You have operational command of this mission. The Vexari have made their intentions perfectly clear. They want to destroy Earth and exterminate our species. We cannot let that happen." "Understood, Admiral." "What reinforcements can we expect?" "The Third Fleet is currently stationed at Mars. They're mobilizing now. But it will take them at least 6 hours to reach your position. You need to hold the line until they arrive." 6 hours. Daniel did the math in his head. Against 300 enemy ships with only 23 of their own, 6 hours might as well be an eternity. But he had no choice. Running was not an option, and surrender meant the death of everyone he had ever known. "We'll hold them, Admiral," he said. "Whatever it takes." The transmission ended, and Daniel turned to face his senior officers. Catherine Moore stood at the communications station, her fingers hovering over the controls. Commander Rachel Kim, the tactical officer, studied the enemy positions with narrowed eyes. Marcus Cole waited by the engineering console, ready to perform miracles with nothing but spare parts and determination. These were the people who would fight beside him. These were the people who would either save humanity or die trying. Daniel opened a channel to the entire fleet. His voice echoed through every ship, every cockpit, every corridor where crew members waited for their orders. "This is Commander Hayes. In a few hours, we will face the greatest threat our species has ever known. The enemy outnumbers us, outguns us, and believes they have already won. They are wrong," he paused, letting his words sink in. "For 300 years, humanity has spread across the stars. We have faced every challenge the universe has thrown at us, and we have survived. Today we face another challenge, and today, like every day before, we will rise to meet it. We fight not just for ourselves, but for everyone we have ever loved. For Earth, for humanity. For the future," he took a deep breath and spoke his final words. "All ships, prepare to jump to Outpost Kappa 7. Squadron 42, launch when ready. May whatever gods you believe in watch over us all." The stars stretched and blurred as the fleet jumped into hyperspace, racing toward a battle that would decide the fate of the human race. The journey through hyperspace took for long hours. Every minute felt like an eternity as the crew of the Uns Valiant prepared for what awaited them on the other side. Pilots ran through their checklists again and again. Gunners calibrated their weapons with careful precision. Medics stocked their stations with supplies, knowing they would need every bandage and medicine they had. When the fleet finally dropped out of hyperspace, near Outpost Kappa 7, the sight that greeted them stole the breath from every person who saw it. The Vexari Armada filled the void like a living nightmare. Their ships were unlike anything humans had ever built. They were organic, grown rather than constructed, with hulls that looked like the shells of massive insects. Dark purple and blood-red colors covered their surfaces, and strange lights pulsed along their edges like the beating of a heart. Some ships had tentacles that stretched for kilometers, while others bristled with weapons that glowed with deadly energy. At the center of the formation sat the largest vessel any human had ever seen. The Harbinger was a dreadnought nearly 15 kilometers long, a monster of war that dwarfed everything around it. Its surface crawled with activity, and its weapons arrays pointed toward the distant blue dot that was Earth. "Holy Mother of God," whispered Lieutenant Catherine Moore, her face pale as she stared at the tactical display. Commander Daniel Hayes felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him, but he refused to let it show. His crew needed him to be strong. They needed him to be the rock they could cling to in this storm of fear and chaos. Tactical analysis. "Commander Kim," he ordered, his voice calm and steady. Rachel Kim worked her console with quick fingers, her eyes scanning the flood of data streaming across her screen. 312 enemy vessels confirmed, sir. 47 cruisers, 218 destroyers, 46 frigates, and 1 dreadnought class. Their weapons are charging, and they're forming into attack formations. And our forces? 23 ships, Commander. 60 fighters ready for launch. The numbers were impossible. 14 enemy ships for every one of theirs. It was the kind of odds that made strategists shake their heads and walk away. But walking away was not something humanity knew how to do, Chief. Engineer Marcus Cole looked at the display and let out a low whistle. Well, I've had worse odds at poker. Of course, I lost those hands pretty badly. A few nervous laughs rippled through the bridge. It was exactly what the crew needed. A moment of humanity in the face of inhuman terror. Daniel opened a fleet-wide channel, knowing that his words would be heard by every soul in the fleet. Thousands of men and women waited to hear what he would say. He could not promise them victory. He could not promise them survival. But he could give them something to fight for. All ships, this is Commander Hayes. I will not lie to you about what we face today. The enemy is vast. The enemy is powerful. They believe that their numbers will crush us, that we will break and run like frightened animals. They are about to learn how wrong they are. Paused, looking around at his bridge crew. Catherine stood ready at communications. Rachel tracked enemy movements with focused intensity. Marcus had his hands on the engineering controls, ready to squeeze every ounce of power from the engines. These were good people. Brave people. They deserved a leader who believed in them. Humanity has never been defined by the size of our armies or the power of our weapons. We are defined by our spirit, by our refusal to surrender even when all hope seems lost, by our love for each other and for the future we fight to protect. Today, we write a new chapter in our history. Today, we show the galaxy what humans are made of. In the fighter bay of the Uns Valiant, Samuel Drake listened to the speech through his helmet speakers. Around him, 60 pilots sat ready in their Hornets, their engines humming with power. Some were veterans who had flown dozens of combat missions. Others were fresh from the academy, their hands shaking slightly on their controls. But all of them shared the same determination. They would fight. They would protect their homes. They would make humanity proud. Squadron 42, you are cleared for launch. Came the order from flight control. Samuel took a deep breath and gripped his flight stick. Alpha Wing, form up on me. We're taking point position. Watch each other's backs out there. We fly together, we fight together, and we survive together. Now let's go give these aliens the worst day of their lives. The bay doors opened, revealing the vast battlefield beyond. One by one, the Hornets screamed out into space, their engines leaving trails of blue fire against the black canvas of the void. They formed into precise formations, each pilot knowing exactly where they belonged. The Vexari responded immediately. From the bellies of their cruisers poured thousands of drone fighters. They were small and fast, each one controlled by the hive mind that connected all Vexari technology. They moved in perfect synchronization, flowing through space like swarms of angry insects. Here they come, Laura Bennett said over the Squadron channel. Her voice was tight but controlled. All wings engage at will, Samuel ordered. Remember your training? Keep your cool, and show these bastards what human pilots can do. The two forces collided in a storm of fire and fury. Plasma bolts streaked across the darkness, exploding against shields and hulls. Hornets twisted and rolled through the chaos, their pilots pushing their machines to the absolute limit of performance. Samuel lined up, a Vexari drone in his sights, and squeezed the trigger. His cannons roared, and the alien craft exploded in a ball of fire. He immediately banked left, dodging a stream of enemy fire, and looped around to take out another target. Beside him, Laura flew with a natural grace that belied her youth. She wove through the enemy formation like a dancer, her weapons striking with deadly precision. 3 drones fell to her guns in the first minute of combat. Splash 3, she reported. These things aren't as tough as they look. Don't get overconfident, Samuel warned. They're testing our defenses, feeling us out. The real attack hasn't started yet, if the universe wanted to prove him right. The Harbinger's main weapon began to glow. Energy gathered along its massive hull, building and building until the light was almost too bright to look at. On the bridge of the Un's Valiant, Rachel Kim's eyes went wide. "Commander, the dreadnought is charging some kind of super weapon. Energy readings are off the scale." Daniel felt ice form in his stomach. All ships, evasive maneuvers. Now. But for some, the warning came too late. The Harbinger fired. A beam of pure destruction sliced through space, moving faster than the eye could follow. It struck the Un's resolute dead center, cutting through the cruiser like a hot knife through butter. The ship exploded instantly. 800 souls gone in the blink of an eye. The beam continued on, catching the Un's Dauntless and tearing off its entire rear section. The wounded ship tumbled through space, venting atmosphere and fire. The shockwave from the blast scattered fighters like leaves in a hurricane. Samuel fought to regain control of his Hornet as warning lights flashed across his console. All around him, pilots struggled to recover from the sudden chaos. "All wings report in," he called over the radio. "Who's still flying?" The responses that came back told a grim story. Alpha Wing had lost 4 pilots. Beta Wing had lost 6. The enemy had drawn first blood, and it had been devastating. But humanity was not finished. Not by a long shot. Commander Hayes stared at the tactical display, his jaw set with determination. They had lost good people, good ships, but they were still fighting. And as long as they were fighting, there was hope. "All ships target the Harbinger's weapon systems," he ordered. "Concentrate fire on that main array. If we can disable it, we have a chance." The human fleet surged forward, battered but unbroken, ready to face whatever horrors awaited them. The battle had raged for 2 brutal hours. The void around Outpost Kappa 7 was filled with wreckage and debris, the remains of ships that had once carried brave men and women into the stars. Fires burned in the darkness where oxygen leaked from shattered hulls. Bodies floated silently among the ruins, their sacrifice marked only by the cold light of distant stars. On the Un's Valiant, the situation was growing desperate. Damage control teams ran through smoke-filled corridors, fighting fires and sealing breaches. The ship had taken multiple hits, and her once gleaming hull was now scarred and blackened. 3 decks had been completely evacuated, and the medical bay was overflowing with wounded. Chief Engineer Marcus Cole worked with furious energy, his hands moving from one damaged system to another. Sparks flew from exposed wiring as he bypassed broken circuits and rerouted power through backup systems. His uniform was soaked with sweat and stained with grease, but he refused to slow down. "Come on, you stubborn piece of junk," he muttered at a particularly troublesome power coupling. "Work with me here." On the bridge, Commander Daniel Hayes studied the tactical display with growing concern. The Vexari fleet had taken losses, but they could afford to. For every ship the humans destroyed, 10 more took its place. The Harbinger still floated at the center of the enemy formation, wounded but very much alive. "Commander, we've lost 60% of our fighters," Lieutenant Catherine Moore reported, her voice heavy with exhaustion. "The Endeavor and the Sentinel are gone. The Victory is barely holding together." Rachel Kim looked up from her console with fear in her eyes. "Sir, the Harbinger is charging its main weapon again. At this range, a direct hit will destroy us." Daniel felt the weight of command pressing down on him like a physical force. They had fought with everything they had, and it was not enough. The enemy was simply too strong, too numerous, too relentless. In a few moments, the Un's Valiant would join the other ships floating lifeless in the void. But then, a new voice crackled over the communication channel. It was a woman's voice, calm and steady, despite the chaos of battle. "Commander Hayes, this is Captain Victoria Lane of the UN's Phoenix. I have an idea, but you're not going to like it." Daniel felt a spark of hope ignite in his chest. Victoria Lane was one of the finest captains in the fleet, a woman who had pulled off impossible victories through sheer brilliance and determination. If anyone could find a way out of this nightmare, it was her. "I'm listening, Captain," he said. "The Phoenix is badly damaged. We've lost our main engines, and our weapons are down to 30% capacity. We're not going to make it back to Earth no matter what happens here. But we can still make a difference." Daniel understood immediately what she was suggesting. His heart grew cold at the thought. Victoria, I can't ask you to do this. You're not asking? I'm telling you what's going to happen. Her voice softened slightly, and for a moment, Daniel heard the friend he had known for 20 years rather than the captain he served alongside. Daniel, we've fought together for a long time. You know there's no other way. The Phoenix can take out the Harbinger's main weapon if we ram them at full speed. It's the only thing that can turn this battle around. The bridge fell silent. Every officer understood what was being proposed. Captain Lane and her entire crew would sacrifice themselves to give the rest of the fleet a chance to survive. There has to be another option, Daniel said, his voice rough with emotion. There isn't, and you know it. We've run out of options, Daniel, but we haven't run out of courage. Let me do this. Let me save the people who still have a chance. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, his face was carved from stone, a calm. Mander had to make impossible choices. That was the burden of leadership. Godspeed, Victoria, he said quietly. It has been the greatest honor of my life to serve with you. The honor was mine, old friend. Now watch the fireworks. The Un's Phoenix broke away from the main formation, her remaining engines flaring with desperate power. She was a wounded ship, trailing smoke and fire, but she flew with a purpose that made her seem almost beautiful. Around her, crew members said their final prayers and held each other close, knowing that the next few minutes would be their last. Captain Victoria Lane sat in her command chair, watching the Harbinger grow larger in her viewport. The massive dreadnought fired at her ship, its weapons tearing chunks from the Phoenix's hull. But still, she came on, unstoppable and unafraid. All hands, this is the captain, she announced over the shipwide intercom. What we do today will be remembered forever. Our sacrifice will save Earth. Our names will live in the hearts of every human who comes after us. I am proud to have served with each and every one of you. The Phoenix plowed through a screen of enemy destroyers, her shields absorbing punishment that would have destroyed her twice over. Vexari drones swarmed around her, firing desperately, but nothing could stop her now. On the Harbinger's bridge, the alien commander watched the approaching ship with confusion. Why would these primitive creatures waste a vessel so carelessly? What could they possibly hope to achieve? The answer came in a flash of blinding light. The Phoenix struck the Harbinger's starboard weapons array at nearly the speed of light. The impact released more energy than a nuclear bomb, tearing through the dreadnought's organic hull and detonating the ammunition stores within. Secondary explosions rippled through the massive ship, blowing holes in its surface and sending flames roaring through its corridors. The shockwaves spread outward, scattering debris across hundreds of kilometers. Ships on both sides were pushed back by the force of the explosion. When the light finally faded, the Harbinger was listing badly, its main weapon completely destroyed. On the bridge of the UN's Valiant, the crew stared at the scene in stunned silence. Then, slowly, someone began to clap. Others joined in, and soon the entire bridge was applauding the sacrifice of their fallen comrades. Daniel Hayes felt tears running down his face, but he did not wipe them away. Victoria Lane and her crew deserved those tears. They had earned them with their blood and their courage. Commander Rachel Kim said softly, "The Harbinger is crippled. Their fleet is in disarray. This is our chance." Daniel straightened his shoulders and let his grief transform into determination. Victoria had given them this opportunity. He would not waste it. All ships, press the attack, he ordered, his voice ringing with renewed strength. Make their sacrifice mean something. Drive these invaders back to whatever hell they came from. In his Hornet, Samuel Drake heard the order and felt fire burn in his chest. He had watched the Phoenix make its final run. He had seen the explosion that saved them all. Now it was his turn to honor that sacrifice. "All wings, you heard the commander," he said over the squadron channel. "The Harbinger is wounded. Let's finish the job for the Phoenix, for Captain Lane, for humanity." The surviving fighters surged forward, their weapons blazing. Below them, the human fleet advanced with renewed purpose. The battle was far from over, but for the first time since it began, victory seemed possible. The tide had turned. The Third Fleet dropped out of hyperspace like angels descending from heaven. 50 warships materialized behind the Vexari formation, their weapons already charging, their crews fresh and eager for battle. At the head of the formation flew the Un's Constellation, the personal flagship of Admiral Patricia Grant. The Admiral stood on her bridge, her silver hair gleaming in the light of tactical displays. She took one look at the devastation before her and understood immediately what had happened. The wreckage of human ships floated among the debris. The crippled Harbinger listed at the center of the enemy fleet. And somehow, against all odds, Commander Hayes and his people were still fighting. "This is Admiral Grant to all human vessels," she announced, her voice carrying across every channel. "The cavalry has arrived. It's time to end this." The effect on morale was immediate and overwhelming. Exhausted pilots found new strength in their limbs. Damaged ships rallied for one final push. Even the wounded Un's Valiant, her hull scarred, and burning, managed to bring her main weapons back online. On the bridge of the Valiant, Commander Daniel Hayes allowed himself a small smile. He had never been so happy to see anyone in his entire life. "Welcome to the party, Admiral," he said over a private channel. "Better late than never. Save the jokes for later, Daniel. We've got work to do." The Third Fleet crashed into the rear of the Vexari formation like a hammer blow. Fresh missiles and energy beams tore through enemy ships that were already damaged and demoralized. The loss of the Harbinger's main weapon had thrown the alien fleet into chaos, and the arrival of reinforcements turned that chaos into panic. Vexari destroyers tried to regroup, but human cruisers cut them down before they could form defensive lines. Enemy cruisers attempted to flee, only to find their escape routes blocked by advancing squadrons. The battle that had seemed so hopeless just minutes ago was now turning into a rout. But the Harbinger was still alive. Crippled and wounded, the massive dreadnought remained a threat. Its secondary weapons still fired, and its engines were struggling to carry it away from the battlefield. If it escaped, it would return with an even larger fleet. Samuel Drake saw the danger clearly. He gathered the surviving pilots of Squadron 42 around him, their Hornets battered but still flying. Of the 60 fighters that had launched from the Valiant, only 18 remained. 18 pilots who had survived 2 hours of brutal combat against impossible odds. "Listen up," Samuel said over the squadron channel. "The Harbinger is trying to run. If that thing gets away, everything we've done today means nothing. We need to take it down once and for all." Laura Bennett's voice came through his speakers, tired but determined. "What's the plan, sir?" Samuel studied the tactical data streaming across his display. The Harbinger's hull had been breached in multiple places by the Phoenix's sacrifice. One of those breaches led directly toward the ship's reactor core. If they could get inside and destroy the reactor, the dreadnought would be finished. "We go in through the hole the Phoenix made," he explained. "Navigate the internal corridors and hit the reactor with everything we've got. It's going to be tight. It's going to be dangerous. And there's a good chance some of us won't make it out." He paused, giving his pilots a chance to understand what he was asking of them. "Anyone who wants to stay outside and provide cover fire, I understand completely. No one will think less of you." For a long moment, there was silence on the channel. Then Laura spoke again. "With respect, sir, you're an idiot if you think any of us are staying behind. We've come this far together. We've finished this together." One by one, the other pilots voiced their agreement. Samuel felt a surge of pride so strong, it nearly overwhelmed him. These were the finest people he had ever known. "All right, then," he said. "Form up on me. We're going in." The 18 Hornets dove toward the wounded dreadnought, weaving through debris and defensive fire. Vexari drones tried to intercept them, but the pilots of Squadron 42 had learned every trick the enemy could throw at them. They dodged and rolled and fired with deadly precision, cutting a path through the chaos. The breach in the Harbinger's hull loomed before them, a gaping wound in the organic surface of the ship. Strange lights flickered within, and the corridors, beyond, twisted and turned like the intestines of some massive creature. "Entering the ship now," Samuel reported. "Stay close and watch your sensors. We don't know what's waiting for us in here." The interior of the Harbinger was like nothing any of them had ever seen. The walls pulsed with bioluminescent light, shifting. through colors that human eyes could barely process. Strange sounds echoed through the corridors, clicks and hums and whispers that seemed almost like language. The air was thick with particles that sparkled in their headlights. "This is creepy as hell," muttered Ensign Peter Morris from Beta Wing. "Focus on the mission," Samuel replied. "We can be creeped out after we blow this thing to pieces." They navigated deeper into the ship, following the energy readings that would lead them to the reactor core. Twice they had to blast through internal barriers that tried to seal the corridors against them. Once they encountered a group of alien soldiers on foot, but the creatures were no match for the Hornets' weapons. Finally, they reached the reactor chamber. It was massive, a cathedral of alien technology that stretched so far above them they could barely see the ceiling. At the center floated a crystalline structure that pulsed with dark energy, the heart of the dreadnought. Cables and conduits connected it to every part of the ship, feeding power to weapons and engines and life support. "That's our target," Samuel said. "All wings, fire everything you have." 16 Hornets unleashed their remaining weapons in a coordinated barrage. Missiles streaked toward the crystal, followed by streams of cannon fire and energy beams. The impacts shattered the crystalline surface, sending cracks spreading through the entire structure. "It's working," Laura shouted. "Keep firing." But the Harbinger was not going to die easily. Automated defense systems activated throughout the chamber, turrets emerging from the walls to pour fire at the intruders. 2 Hornets exploded under the sudden assault, their pilots never even having time to scream. "Evasive maneuvers," Samuel ordered. "Keep hitting that reactor. Don't let up." The remaining pilots dodged and weaved through the deadly crossfire, continuing to pound the reactor even as their comrades fell around them. The crystal was fracturing now, pieces breaking off and floating away as the energy within began to destabilize. "She's going critical," one of the pilots reported. "Need to get out of here." Samuel looked at the reactor one more time, confirming that the job was done. The crystal was crumbling, and chain reactions were already spreading through the ship's systems. "All wings pull out. Full speed back to the breach. Go, go, go." The surviving Hornets turned and raced back through the corridors, the ship shaking and exploding around them.
Ow.
Walls collapsed behind them. Flames roared through passageways they had just flown through. The Harbinger was dying, and it was taking everything inside it down to hell. Samuel's Hornet burst out of the breach just as the Dreadnought's reactor finally gave way. The explosion was unbelievable, a sun being born in the middle of the battlefield. The shockwave caught his ship and sent it tumbling, warning lights screaming in his cockpit. When he finally regained control, he looked back at where the Harbinger had been. There was nothing left but an expanding cloud of fire and debris. "Harbinger. Destroyed." Laura's voice came over the radio, shaky with relief and exhaustion. "We did it. We actually did it." Samuel counted the ships around him. 12 Hornets had made it out. 6 more pilots had been lost in those final moments, but the mission was complete. The threat was ended, and humanity had won. The aftermath of the battle was both triumphant and heartbreaking. With the Harbinger destroyed and their leadership eliminated, the remaining Vexari ships fell into complete disarray. Some tried to fight on, driven by whatever instincts remained in their hive mind. But they were quickly overwhelmed by the combined might of the human fleet. Others attempted to flee, jumping into hyperspace before they could be destroyed. A few simply stopped moving altogether, their crews apparently unable to function without the guidance of their masters by the time the last enemy vessel was either destroyed or driven away. The void around Outpost Kappa 7 was silent, except for the crackle of burning wreckage and the hum of human engines. The battle was over. Humanity had survived, but the costs had been terrible. Of the 23 ships that had arrived with Commander Hayes, only 9 were still operational. The others floated dead in space or had been reduced to scattered debris. Thousands of crew members had lost their lives, their bodies drifting among the ruins of their vessels. The fighter squadrons had been nearly wiped out, with only 31 pilots surviving from an original force of over 200. On the bridge of the UN's valiant commander, Daniel Hayes stood in exhausted silence, staring at the casualty reports scrolling across his display. Each name represented a person he had known, a friend, a colleague, a fellow warrior who had given everything for the cause, Victoria Lane, Gregory Ellis, hundreds of others whose faces he would remember for the rest of his life. Lieutenant Catherine. Moore approached him carefully, as if afraid that any sudden movement might cause him to shatter like glass. "Commander Admiral Grant is requesting to speak with you," she said softly. Daniel nodded and opened the channel. Patricia Grant's face appeared before him, and he saw that she too carried the weight of the losses they had suffered. "Don't have words for what you and your people accomplished today," she said. "You held against impossible odds. You never gave up. You saved Earth and everyone on it." "We lost too many good people," Daniel replied, his voice hollow. "We did, and we will mourn them. But their sacrifice was not in vain. Because of what you did here, billions of people will continue to live. Children will grow up. Families will stay together. That is the gift your people gave the human race." Daniel closed his eyes and let her words wash over him. She was right, of course. The mathematics of war were cruel and simple. The lives lost today had purchased the survival of countless others, but that knowledge did not make the pain any easier to bear. 3 weeks later, Commander Daniel Hayes stood before the United Nations Assembly on Earth. The Great Hall was packed with dignitaries, military officers, journalists, and ordinary citizens who had come to witness the ceremony honoring the heroes of Kapu-7. Behind him, holographic memorial displayed the names and faces of every person who had fallen in the battle. Daniel wore his dress uniform, decorated with medals that felt heavy on his chest. He had written and rewritten his speech a dozen times, trying to find the right words to honor those who had given their lives. In the end, he had thrown away all his drafts and decided to speak from the heart. 3 weeks ago, humanity faced extinction, he began, his voice carrying through the silent chamber. An enemy fleet larger than anything we had ever seen came to destroy us. They believed that their numbers made them invincible. They believed that we would break and run before their power. They were wrong. He paused, looking out at the thousands of faces watching him. The men and women we honor today did not fight because they wanted glory. They did not fight because they thought they would win. They fought because there was something worth fighting for. They fought for their families, their friends, their fellow humans. They fought for the simple right to exist in a universe that tried to snuff us out. In the audience, Samuel Drake sat beside Laura Bennett. Both still bore the scars of the battle, physical and emotional. Around them sat the other survivors of Squadron 42, their numbers painfully small compared to what they had once been. Captain Victoria Lane and the crew of the UNS Phoenix made the ultimate sacrifice so that others could live, Daniel continued. When all hope seemed lost, they flew their wounded ship directly into the enemy, knowing that they would never return. Their courage turned the tide of battle. Their sacrifice saved us all. Tears flowed freely in the audience. Even the most hardened veterans wept openly, remembering friends and comrades who would never come home. The pilots of Squadron 42 faced odds that should have been impossible. They flew into the heart of the enemy dreadnought and destroyed it from within. Many of them did not survive. But those who fell did so knowing that their actions would protect the people they loved. Daniel's voice grew stronger as he approached the end of his speech. Today, we remember the fallen, but we also celebrate what they died for. The Vexari wanted to prove that humanity was weak. Instead, we proved that we are stronger than they could ever imagine. Not because of our weapons or our technology, but because of what lives in our hearts. Love, hope, courage, the refusal to surrender even when everything seems lost. He straightened to his full height, his eyes shining with pride and grief. To any enemy watching from the stars, let the Battle of Kappa 7 serve as a warning. Humanity is not prey. We are not victims. We are the children of Earth, and we will never stop fighting for our right to exist. Attack us, and we will rise. Threaten our homes, and we will defend them with our last breath. This is who we are. This is who we will always be. The assembly erupted in applause, a sound so loud it seemed to shake the walls. People stood and cheered, their voices rising in a wave of emotion that swept through the hall and spread across the planet. Outside the assembly building, Samuel and Laura walked through a garden that had been created to honor the fallen. Holographic images of the deceased floated above stone pedestals, their faces peaceful and proud. Fresh flowers surrounded each memorial. Left by grieving families and grateful citizens, Laura stopped before the image of a young pilot she had known, a man who had died in the final assault on the Harbinger's reactor. "Do you think it was worth it?" she asked quietly. "All the death, all the sacrifice, was it worth it?" Samuel stood beside her, looking at the face of his fallen comrade. "I think about that question every day," he admitted. "I don't have a perfect answer, but I know this. If we hadn't fought, if we had run away or surrendered, everything we love would have been destroyed. Our friends, our families, our entire species. They died so that others could live. I think that has to mean something." Laura nodded slowly, wiping tears from her eyes. "So what do we do now?" Samuel looked up at the sky, where the stars were just beginning to appear as the sun set over the horizon. "We keep going. We rebuild. We get stronger. And if the Vexari ever come back, we'll be ready for them." That's what they would have wanted. That's what they died for. They stood together in the fading light to survivors among many, carrying the memory of the fallen and the hope of a species that refused to die. The battle was over, but the story of humanity was far from finished. It was only just beginning. Above them, the stars shone cold and eternal, waiting to see what humanity would do next. And somewhere in the darkness, the enemies of Earth were learning a lesson they would never forget. Humanity was not weak. Humanity was not afraid. No, humanity would never, ever give up. The end.